Welcome back to Cheddar's News Wrap. Just a reminder, the Senate is in recess and the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump. We will go back to it live as soon as it resumes around 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time. In other news, would a COVID-19 testing requirement for domestic air travel make you more likely to board a plane during the pandemic? That could soon be a possibility. Newly minted Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg saying the CDC is looking at all options to reduce coronavirus spread during travel. That policy is already in effect for international flights to the U.S., but some big names are arguing that implementing that policy for domestic travel is a terrible idea. Here to discuss is friend of the show, Brian Del Monte, president of the Aviation Agency. Brian, welcome. What would a negative COVID-19 test for domestic flyers mean for the airline industry as a whole?
Well, it depends who has the foot to bill to implement it all. The idea, right, is to keep the asymptomatic from traveling. Early on in the pandemic, when the Trump administration was dealing with COVID, the airlines embraced testing here and there, right, to suggest it's all safe and everything else. Now, faced with a mandate of every person has to step on a flight, suddenly it's welcome to the party of what I've been saying for over a year, which is that this could be more difficult and more onerous than people understand. I tend to believe that vaccines still represents the best way to reduce the risk of transmission. Airline flights are antithetical to the containment of a pandemic. We can take people and move them great distances safely and quickly. The evidence doesn't suggest that airlines are a major source of transmission. And so, I know the new CDC director made that comment, but implementing this is not going to be easy. And it's not something that can happen tomorrow. And if it's rolled out in an ad hoc manner, it would be disastrous.
I will concur with what you said. You've been on this show plenty of times, and you've always said this will be very challenging. Who will be responsible when it comes to creating the infrastructure for testing, or who should be?
Well, if we make this decision, and let me just say, I'm not against testing. Okay, this is not going to be the last time we deal with a pandemic, unfortunately. So if we decide that this is going to be something that we see as a national security activity, and maybe we should. I mean, maybe public health risk should be viewed as a national security activity. Then just like we have screening at the airports and whatnot, and that's all done through the federal government probably should build this infrastructure for, at the very minimum, the handling of this data and all this testing. I mean, it's not clear to me what's going to happen and what that infrastructure looks like. So do I have to show up at the airport with a negative test, or do I go to the airport and get tested? Right? Well, we don't know, right? It's just kind of airy-fairy nebulous. So, I mean, if we're going to have this infrastructure where we're going to treat this as a requirement to travel, which, by the way, we do this with international travel. You do have to show you have inoculations. You do have to show that you are healthy to enter, as part of visa requirements and all kinds of other things on international travel. But if we're going to require this just for people to fly around the United States, I don't see how it can't be a federal-led activity then.
I do.
So
I didn't mean to interrupt. Thank you for that.
No.
I do want to ask you about what the Delta Airline CEO, Ed Bastian, said about mandatory testing. He said, quote, "It would be a horrible idea as air travel has a low risk of transmission and airports have been made safer from the mask mandate." I think I know what your reaction to this is, Brian, but I would love to hear it.
Yeah, well, welcome to the party. I was saying that a year ago. It's politics. And I heard something big was going on today, which is, why we're squeezing this in. But it's all politics. When the airlines were and continued to struggle to survive, they wanted people to think it was safe, so they rolled this out in an ad hoc manner. And then it's another thing to have to do it now as a systematic thing. But Ed's right. I also saw Southwest Airlines came out. I think United did as well. It's going to be really hard for them to be involved in this activity, and it's really going to put the brakes on what little air traffic there is. So one of the things we got to do is really ask ourselves, is this worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze on this? Are airlines, a really big transmitter? The Biden administration's committed to following the science and following the data. That sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. And if airlines really are a problem, well, then I guess we have to address it.
What are you hearing from people in the airline industry, Brian? Do they support the possibility of negative COVID tests being required for domestic travel, especially?
I haven't heard anybody who's like, yeah, let's do that. They're kind of beaten and battered just trying to survive day to day. So I don't think a lot of people are thinking through to the future. I do think they look at this and they're like, yet one more thing now we'll have to overcome for people to get on an airplane. And that's understandable. I mean, they've been through a lot for the last year. As the vaccine rolls out, things will get better. But, right now things are still pretty rough. So I can totally appreciate they don't want yet another body blow. This would significantly impact your ability to get on a plane. If you had to demonstrate you were COVID negative, whatever that mechanism looks like, that will reduce, you can't just jump on a plane and go somewhere then.
Brian Zelmonte, president of the Aviation Agency. We always love coming to you for this stuff, Brian. We hope you come back because we know this conversation is not going anywhere. Friend of the show, Brian Zelmonte. Thank you so much again, Brian. We'll see you soon.